Welcome to Stelligent's DevOps on AWS Radio.
Welcome to our 28th episode of DevOps on AWS Radio. I'm Scott Alexander, Senior DevOps Automation Engineer at Stelligent.
I'm Shag Evans. I'm also a Senior DevOps Automation Engineer here at Stelligent.
And I'm Keith Monahan, also a Senior DevOps Automation Engineer here at Stelligent.
Welcome to the podcast, Keith.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So you can listen to our previous episodes by searching for DevOps on AWS Radio or going to Stelligent's blog at stelligent.com/blog. We're on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and recently now on Google Podcast.
Keith joins us today to talk about the Stelligent Book Club and how it helps foster a culture of sharing here. But first, I had the chance to interview Kinnaird McQuade, creator of Cloudsplaining and Policy Sentry. With me now is Kinnaird McQuade, the lead security engineer at Salesforce. I came across his contact information and him on Twitter when I was talking with another engineer, and he said, you have to check out what they're doing. They had two tools that were out there, and he showed me both of them, and they were really cool. So I took that opportunity. I reached out on Twitter, DM'd him, and said, would you be interested in coming on the podcast? So he's joining me today to talk about the two tools. Kinnaird, if you want to give a quick introduction of yourself, tell us who you are, and then we'll dig into some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I'm Kinnaird McQuade, lead security engineer at Salesforce. My background's in application security, cloud security, security automation, and I've done a lot of work in automating AWS security especially.
That's a huge part of the two tools that you put out there, is trying to look at security and basically automating that to create more secure environments. So the two tools, the first one is Policy Sentry. That's been around a little while. And the newest one, what was it, about a month ago, called Cloudsplaining.
Yep.
All right. And I to put it in context, when I first looked at your website, Cloudsplaining wasn't even listed yet. It was still so new that it hadn't even been listed. So tell us a bit about that. It's brand new, open source release. How have people responded to it? What have people said? What's the feedback?
So the reception from the community has been really solid. I've gotten a lot of really good feedback, and it seems like this helps identify some difficult pain points in AWS security that people are dealing with, where Policy Sentry focused on authoring secure IAM policies, creating policies with least privilege access by default. Cloudsplaining helps identify all the policies where that could be used. So it helps identify where somebody could exfiltrate data, so S3 getObject open to everybody, like privilege escalation opportunities, unrestricted infrastructure modification, where engineers might be using over permissive AWS managed policies, especially by default in their deployments. Here, they're able to identify where they can uplift all their previous IAM and then where they can author those secure policies by default. So yeah, a lot of people have been really interested in it.
Good to hear. Yeah, that can IAM policies, they are a double-edged sword, and it is incredible the amount of power you have with them, but at the same point, making sure you're doing them right. So the first tool, Policy Sentry, took an approach to that to try and make it simpler to manage the IAM policies. And what was your approach there? How did you set that tool up to work and make it easier?
Well, a lot of it was inspired by my experience with implementation and building out production systems. And then in my previous consulting experience, being in the position of somebody who has to help those their customers write those IAM policies securely. And that usually ends up taking place a lot later in development, right before something gets pushed out to production in that old school waterfall model that security is often placed in, right? So being somebody who's put those systems into production before, I knew that a lot of infrastructure as code developers, anybody who's developing those systems, they've all been in the spot where they're trying to get something to work, and they'll try to put together least privilege IAM policies, and they end up scouring through the documentation and trying to lock it down, but eventually maybe their team lead or their project manager is pushing them to meet deadlines, and they don't have a security person on their team. It'll take too long to put through a request, and they realize, oh man, it would be great to have some level of automation that would do this for me, but I got to get my job done. So I'm just going to use managed policies. And that's over permissive by default, right? So I'm really passionate about making security easier for people. The approach here is pretty cool. You just say, here's what I need access to, and here's the access level. Now go create the IAM policy for me. So it abstracts that level of complexity. And at the simplest level, it's really copying and pasting resource arns into a YAML file and running a command.
And so the resources, any AWS resource, an EC2 instance, an S3 bucket, anything along that line, even a Lambda function, and then the access level. How is the access level managed, since each of those are kind of unique?
There's a create template command that will actually go create the YAML file for you, so you don't have to remember how it's structured. And it's divided into a few different sections. The main sections are read, write, list, permissions management, and tagging. And so you just list out the resource arms that you need access to under those, and it'll go create it for you.
Very nice, very nice. And especially that being able to generate the template is super helpful, because like you say, for so many people, they need to do their job.
Yeah.
And that's what their end goal is. I have a job, I have a ticket that I'm working on, I have a program I'm writing. I want to do this securely, but I need to be able to do it in the context of getting my job done. And I can't go spend a month learning IAM principles. So this is really cool to be in, talking about a tool that saves people that problem, or saves the trouble, makes it easier for them to just go out there, get their work done at the end of the day. So yeah, definitely give that a try for anyone who's out there listening. That's a really good start, and something that you can implement and be able to add to your pipelines just to generate those policies and make it work to have an easier time and a more secure time. Now we move over to Cloudsplaining. This one's a little more complex, because that goal of least privilege, we all want it, but it's difficult to get there and analyze and figure out exactly what is the minimum I can get away with. You've written a tool to help people get there. So say I have a policy that's out there, that exists for my application, and I pull up Cloudsplaining and start running it. What does Cloudsplaining do to be able to help understand, here's permission you don't need?
What it does is, so I was inspired to create that kind of from the feedback that I got from Policy Sentry, where people said, Policy Sentry is fantastic and it can help me write secure policies from now on. We've created all these policies in our accounts so far. How do I figure out which ones we need to fix? So where can it be fixed exactly? How do we automate that? So Cloudsplaining will go scan through all the IAM details in your account, and it'll look at each of the policies that you have. It uses the Policy Sentry logic to parse through it, expand those wildcard actions, and then identify where you should be able to practice resource ARNs, but where you're not. And it'll go generate, there's a mode to scan individual policy files. So that can be used in like a CI pipeline. You can also scan an entire account. And it's especially assessor friendly for if you're doing a pen test and you're trying to figure out, okay, I have all these IAM details. What are the principles that I would want to like if I want to get access to an S3 bucket, what principle do I have to compromise in order to get that, right? So
that's nice, just being able to have that, and especially for internal teams. I've been through that process with an internal team that did have that level of information. And so they're there, but trying to figure out what to tell them, what they need. We were just handing over volumes and volumes of information, and then they're trying to filter through it. So an automated way for them to be able to find, oh, hey, here's the roles, here's where there's excessive permission. I'm sure they would have loved to have had something that could have just filtered that down and been like, oh, here's where we should focus all of our effort on.
yeah, definitely. I mean, part of why I wrote this tool, right, is I've invested a lot of time in learning how to do IAM properly, right? But that's doing it at this level where I've had to build out a lot of automation, right? That's a high barrier to entry, and in my opinion, developers shouldn't have to know how IAM works in that level of detail in order to do it well and in order to do it securely. In the case of credentials compromise, we need to reduce the blast radius. We shouldn't have S3 getObject to all these different buckets, right? Shouldn't have KMS decrypt to all these different keys. And that goes for any number of services, right?
Adding even policies beyond that, like resource policies, helps
Yeah.
so much in that, because then it's that second check that even stops. If they're able to get an IAM principal that has an expanded permission, the resource policy helps in that regard too. But again, like you say, keeping a developer up to speed on all of that is very difficult, because
Yeah.
that's not their primary job. There has to be someone out there who's paying attention to it on the broader scale and helping guide them so they understand and can very easily implement what needs to be done. And that really, there's a whole, DevSecOps movement going on that's been happening for a while, and adding security to our pipelines and making that more of a front and center thing. When you think about software development and security, what are your thoughts on how we make that easier for everyone?
Developers prefer using tools rather than having to have meetings, right? And so I like to envision a future in which security is as self-service as possible, right? The spam the UI wizard approach, right? Um, that's one level. Having Jenkins shared libraries where the developers just have to configure a YAML file in order to set the right settings, right? And if you can capture 95% of security issues, or even 80% of security issues, through giving the developer the ability to go address those issues on their own, then that's a huge victory, and you've reduced the workload for your security team. Scalability is most achievable through self-service, and for both assessment, remediation, and then collecting that data so security can analyze those metrics and then solve it with automation.
Yep. And that's the backside of that problem. Is on the security side, there's an auditing aspect that has to be done. And that's incredibly time consuming if everything's being done manually. If we can move over and have tools that are doing as much of that as possible, we save ourselves, especially if it's in pre-deployment, even incidents being created that we have to waste time tracking. Sorry, I shouldn't say
Yeah.
waste time, but we have to spend time tracking down just to figure out, okay, what happened, who did it, what do we need to teach, versus, oh, hey, that got caught early on, or the tool doesn't even allow an insecure configuration to exist. And so therefore we know this, as long as it goes to that tool, we can be, we're in a safer position than we would be if they were doing it manually. So I like
Definitely.
that. And
Yeah.
when you talk about security, you're not just talking about your personal interest here. I mean, you went to college and picked up a bachelor's and a master's degree in cybersecurity, which those had to be pretty new degrees when you picked them up. Which year was that again?
So I graduated with my bachelor's in IT with concentrations in cybersecurity and computer science in 2015, and I got my master's in cybersecurity in December 2016, both at Marymount University in Arlington, Virginia.
What was involved in, especially the master's degree? That's a pretty advanced step. So what did it take to get a master's with the focus in cybersecurity?
Sure. So of course there were the technical classes, right, with networking and pen testing, et cetera, right? But I think the best part about my master's degree and my experience getting that at Marymount, which is a liberal arts college, right? So there was a lot of writing, and writing on technical topics. If you've been out in the field, it's difficult for a lot of people, right? And writing on technical topics became one of my strong suits. I think as a result of my master's and working with those professors and refining my papers and making sure that I'm explaining those difficult topics as clearly as possible. That was probably the best part of my master's, but it was a lot of writing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I hit that even on just blog posts trying to get it all down. And I've found that I almost have to start at the bottom of the page, like build my outline and then work from the bottom up to eventually get in, because I can never get it started. Like I can never write that introductory paragraph, but I can just start throwing things at the wall and eventually get to a cohesive article. And so I know what you mean. Like that writing skill is definitely something that needs to be developed. And it's great to see people who have it, just because it's such a great way to share. And you can pass that on, and it can really go far beyond what you can do just, inside a company. If you're publishing information, and putting even tools up as open source, the more you put it out there, the more value people get from it. I actually visited, there's the open source Salesforce site. And there's a lot of tools there that Salesforce has put out, it is allowed to be released or encouraged to be released. What's it like to create, a new project and open source it at Salesforce?
Well, it was pretty cool because like many open source projects, I created these ones to solve problems at my job, right? Creating open source software at Salesforce it's a pretty good experience. We have like a dedicated program for it, and they help with reviewing some of my documentation and some of my code, and helping with the blog posts and promotion, which helps to develop a community around any tools that we open source. Yeah, it's been a really good experience. So definitely a learning experience for me, as these were the first ones that I really open sourced and got a lot of traction on. But it's an exciting process.
And did you plan, like, when you started writing these, this is going to be an open source project, or did you just start writing these going, I need a tool to help developers make this process easier? And at the end of it, you turned around and went, we should really put this out there. Which process did you use on this one?
So it was about 50% through. Initially when I was building out both of these tools, it started with just me learning how to do it manually, and then me scripting part of it. And then I realized that, hey, other people could use this. Oh wait, this can automate away part of my job. Oh wait, I can automate all of this, and then it won't have to be part of my job. And and so about 50% through all of that, as I got to the point where I wanted other people to go out and try it, I realized pretty quickly, hey, I might want to open source this. This would help a lot of people. It's really cool writing security automation tools, because it's really rewarding, because it's not just me that's getting value out of it. I'm replicating myself, and so
No, I like the
I'm
thought. I mean, just,
yeah.
and it's true. So, historically speaking, I look back at what's made me most successful. And it's been those places where I've been able to automate myself out of a job, because inevitably, if I can automate what I'm doing today, in 6 months, I have higher value work that I can be accomplishing.
Exactly,
And so
exactly.
talking about replicating your, what you understand and what your skill, there's so much truth and importance in doing that. Because if we're bogged down with what we're trying to get done today and what we're trying to understand today, a year from now, we're still stuck in that same spot. We're probably missing something new that's come along that we need to really be focusing on. And so that is such a central point that I've found in my career, at least. And it sounds like you're finding the same in yours. It's better to automate myself out of a job, because strangely, as many times as I've done it, I still am employed and I'm doing even more fun stuff today than that was back then.
Yeah, definitely. And some of the cool moments that have come out of this is with both of these tools, I've and especially with Policy Sentry, I've gotten a few DMs about it, where somebody will say, "Hey, I'm from this household name company that has millions of customers, and we've been using your tool for months." And I get to go away with that feeling that I didn't even know that was happening, and I know that I'm helping improve the security of other companies and their customers, just overnight, right? Even while I'm not working, and with security, it's rewarding because I know I'm doing something for the greater good, making the internet a little bit more secure. And we're not I'm not a doctor. I'm not saving babies or helping people with the virus or et cetera, right? I'm doing my part to help make the internet a little bit safer, because think about how it would impact, say, a grandmother or a family member, anybody, if their personal information is compromised, right? So doing this security automation and open sourcing that stuff, I feel like I'm doing my part, right?
Definitely. And just, yeah, like you say, I mean, there's so much out there to be done in this space. It's great to have people that are stepping up and producing it. Are you looking for help on these projects at all, or is it set up for people to be able to jump in and offer
Yeah.
help?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm always trying to help expand the community, especially with these tools. I mean, they're my babies, right? Anybody should feel free to try it out, open a issue on GitHub. If they have like some questions, join the Gitter channel, DM me on Twitter. You don't have to be, when you're contributing to the open source community, making a pull request is not the only way to contribute, right? Asking questions. How many times have we all been saved by some issue on GitHub that was closed like 2 years ago, right? You can be that person for somebody else. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, it's always nice when you throw a search in and the first thing you see is a resolved issue
Yeah.
on GitHub that perfectly explains, this is your problem and here's how you fix it. And you're like, thank you.
Yeah, I always try and
Wonderful.
think of these things as if if I have identified a problem, I'm not the only person who has noticed it so far. You know, that's how some of this automation comes in place. Why I wrote some of these things, but it's also like why it's important for me to speak up about like even a question that I have.
Yeah, and there's also the proverbial story of people who've seen, like they search for a problem they're having and find, an article, a blog post, a Stack Overflow, a GitHub issue that they actually wrote the resolution of, and they're able to thank their previous self for publicly documenting it, and then other people add value to that, and you've got an even better answer when you come back 3 years later and have forgotten about it entirely. While we're talking on open source, before we leave that entirely, I should ask, what languages did you write these in?
I wrote those tools in Python.
Okay, so Python's the main language if anybody's looking for a Python project and something to jump into on the security side. Sounds like there's a opportunity here. Last questions, moving a little bit away from the tooling, but just as a security person, you're dealing with engineering security in AWS. I have a few people that are following the landing zones and control tower. And when I was looking at your resume and your website, you've done a lot with landing zones. What are your thoughts on that transition, and what's the right solution? Where's the future direction there? What are your thoughts on how they're doing?
Yeah, so multi-account architecture is difficult, and landing zone was the precursor to control tower, and in many ways, it's landing control tower is landing zone with the UI. It's like migrating to cloud in general. Using control tower for getting started with multi-account architecture can be transformational for organizations and improving their provisioning process. There is a lot to be desired, though, regardless of whether you use that or anything else for automating your AWS setup. There's a lot of glue that you're going to need to add anyway. So you have to invest in some security automation and engineering. But it's a
Yeah,
great start. So
and that was the big thing. I mean, historically, I go back, maybe 3 years now, and we were talking with our AWS solutions architect. The question came up of account vending machines, and at the time, it was, yeah, it's a great solution, but it takes so much work to be able to implement. And this was before anything was out there. Even organizations were still a really new concept, and
definitely.
it was just they're like, you need so much work. You're going to spend all of your engineering time solving this problem. So every step they're taking helps, but definitely there's still such an engineering effort to do that right, and the amount of glue.
Yeah.
It'll be curious to see how that one plays out over the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Because again, like you said, we need to make this more automated, more obvious, and easier for everyone to be able to deal with, so that we have fewer issues.
Yeah, I do wish that the account deletion and deprovisioning process was a lot easier because, especially if you're setting up control tower and landing zone for like a training environment, the cleanup of those resources can be difficult and expensive and time consuming, right? I actually, when I was setting up a training program for that, I found myself missing the Azure resource management approach a lot because if you want to clean up a resource, you just delete the resource group and boom, it's gone. because the resources are tied to the resource groups and subscriptions, whereas with AWS, it's not.
Yeah, it takes a lot more. And we actually have a tool internally. It's called Janitor, but it's an automation of, I think, AWS Nuke to go through our dev account and every week blow out all the resources because somebody had that issue. And it's so hard to get everything deleted. They had to script it out to be able to go through and find every resource in every region and clear them all out. And, that's difficult within AWS to shut it all down.
Yeah.
I'm sure we've all seen that horror story of somebody who's like, I keep getting billed 12 cents a month and I cannot explain why.
Yeah. I've seen in my consulting days, I saw some companies take the approach of just submit the request to close the account and then get billed for it for 3 months, and then AWS will shut it down. And in some ways, that can be the easiest way to deal with it. But you should definitely open source Janitor.
I'll have to check into that one. I think mostly it's just the scripts are on the tool, but we'll definitely link up to the main tool in the show notes, as well as links to all your information and your Twitter handle as well. You mentioned people can DM you. What is your Twitter handle?
K McQuade 3.
KMcQuade 3, great. And we'll definitely link that up just to make it easier. People can see that in the show notes, and that gets embedded in the MP3 and everything. How's things at Salesforce right now? You mentioned kind of everything going on. We're still in the pandemic phase. For context of anyone who catches this much later, it's right now late May 2020. And so, of course, that's a big issue, the pandemic. How's everything at Salesforce? What's going on with the technology org there?
Yeah, well, we're making it, and we're still hiring a lot. And I wanted to make sure that I know a lot of people have been hit hard with the pandemic, and also how it's affected the economy, and people have been losing their jobs. And so, if anybody has been, especially if you've been affected by the economic effects on the pandemic. From the pandemic, we are hiring a lot. We have open spots in infrastructure security, AppSec, open spots for technical project managers, red teaming, GRC, and systems engineers in general. So feel free to reach out to me if you're interested. And
yeah, lots of opportunity there to be able to find a new position if you're looking. So that's good to hear. I mean, that's always a good thing. To be at a company that's hiring and looking for new people in the middle of something like this. There's some reassurance there.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good spot to work. I love it here. So yeah.
Good to hear. Yeah. I mean, it definitely seems like you've been smiling this entire time. I know we're a podcast, so people don't get the video feed, but you've been smiling this entire time, having a great time talking about all these tools, I assume.
Yeah.
That continues into your daily work of actually producing them and getting it all done.
Yeah, definitely. So.
All right. Well, thank you for the time. I really appreciate the opportunity to share what you've been up to with these tools and be able to get that out to our audience and tell everybody about it. Any last closing thoughts?
I definitely encourage anybody out there too. If you have a really cool security tool that you've been working on internally that has been helpful to your organization, definitely open source it. It'll help a lot of people, and more people will notice it internally as well.
It was a lot of fun to do that interview. That last point, though, it really stuck with me when I heard him say it, which is if you have an internal tool, look at releasing it, not just so other people outside the company can benefit, but also so more people inside the company can benefit as well. And so that's where I'm looking to continue that discussion with Shag and Keith. What are your thoughts on that? How many companies they're finding when they open source stuff, even their internal employees, they learn about it who wouldn't have otherwise heard about the product. Have you heard about that happening?
So, it struck me especially lately, a lot of real enterprise focused companies finding that it's a better way to kind of socialize what you're doing to get those things that would be proprietary and increase the conversation around them. It's kind of an iron sharpens iron sort of perspective too. I think you get dialogue from outside, you get other perspectives. Capital One is one that really stands out to me as a company, like a big enterprise company that's really investing in that as well. I know Salesforce is a good example coming from Kinnaird, but just looking at what they're doing with Cloud Custodian and some of their other projects where they're really like taking that idea that you just talked about and investing in creating an open source ecosystem around fintech software and trying to socialize it within their own developer ecosystem, internally, and then bringing that interface to the outside as well. I think they've got a whole team focused on that, and Cloud Custodian is just one example. It's neat seeing enterprise-focused companies that have a strong investment in security and the privacy of their data, still finding a way to get the software that works with all that out there in the public, where we can all use it and all find ways to improve it and contribute back to it. And it's just one thing feeds another. And another way I think that stood out is, like, you look at the things Stelligent does on our own blog. So many of our recent blog posts are focused on DevOps, automation, and security, and really focusing on that. Like, what we're doing internally, we're trying to find ways to socialize our own software that one engineer writes with other Stelligent engineers, but also finding ways to socialize it to the rest of the DevOps community. And so, I think when you open source things, it forces you to take the time to talk about them and document them well and write about them. That has a powerful impact wherever your audience is, internal or external.
And that documenting it to share. It just, it's an internal tool. Maybe the documentation doesn't matter or doesn't get the focus, but the idea that this is going to be something that's out representing the company to the world, let's make sure we've got all the documentation really well done. That feeds back into making it even easier to use internally.
Yeah, it's a really natural way to hold yourself accountable.
I was thinking of all the open source tools I've used as an engineer, and as Shag mentioned, Cloud Custodian is a great tool. They open sourced it, and you work with companies that want to control resources, and using it it's a great starting point. You don't have to write code; it's maintained by a community. There's other tools I've used, like Cloud Tracker, which uses CloudTrail to determine least privileges or overprivileged roles in policy documents. So there's a lot of these great open source security tools that they just get better being in the community.
You mentioned the community aspect of it, and having a group that when you show up at a conference, there's people that you may only see at that event, but because of that community, you're really well connected to them the rest of the year. And it's a good chance to be able to see people and have that connection and feel like you're really part of something and be able to share successes.
Yeah, it reminds me of our own product. You go to reInvent and tell people you work for Stelligent, and they say, "Oh, you're the CFN Mag people." I mean, it is community open source, but it's still tagged to us at Stelligent here.
And I know they've been adding quite a number of rules to that as well, based on feedback that we get from the community of where we have rules that people would like to see.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear about other use cases too, and you get a perspective on where people take your software and maybe apply it in ways that you weren't necessarily expecting.
Back to the blog post, Shag, you mentioned kind of the security aspect and brought that up. One of them was our Trend Micro Smart Scan blog post written by Sean Acoyne. That was definitely focused on how do we make sure that once we built a container, it actually is secure, that we can test it. We know there's no known bad code or malware or any of the other things that Trend catches in that container built in. He even used one of the virus samples. I didn't realize that there are virus samples out there that are designed to be safe, but be detected so you can test and actually validate that the scanner is catching what it should. And so he used one of those to prove that Trend Micro was properly scanning the containers and doing what it said it would do, and rejecting containers, stopping a build pipeline when it has something in there it shouldn't. That was a really good read this week, on our blog that I saw from Sean. What about you, Keith? Have either of you seen anything on the blog that caught your attention?
Well, yeah, I was thinking just as far as the virus signatures and things go, it reminds me of ages ago when I was a mail postmaster, kind of admin, doing something similar with virus scanning at the, your email egress entry points. You can get virus signatures added to your send mail, postfix, things like that, to do the same thing. I've only ever dipped my toes in those water a those waters a little bit. The fact that there are signatures out there that are designed just for verification of your code purposes itself, I think is a pretty neat feature. As far as the blog goes, we have 2 posts in a series on Amazon Inspector, first introducing it and then describing a way that you can make use of it in your image baking pipelines. And I think it's a great tool. It's a little, Inspector itself can take a little while to run. So when you can automate it and work it into your Omni creation pipelines, I think it's a fantastic way to make use of it.
And Jeff Barr actually tweeted out that blog post today. So that was cool to see even, him picking it up and sharing one of our blog posts because it's such a valuable demonstration of the tool.
And always exciting to see Jeff Barr retweet something for us.
Just talking about policy Sentry and Cloudsplaining, and I even mentioned Cloud Tracker, reminded me of the blog post from Eric Kasich for a thought experiment / tool called CFN Leapfrog, which can generate those policies for you.
One thing that really stands out to me here is that Eric Kasich has been on a run lately with blog posts that are giving open source code as proofs of concept for ideas he has about ways to improve your DevOps security.
It's almost like open sourcing the conversation, right? You get a lot of people involved in the thought process and how to fix these problems.
We also had Paul's article in Forbes, 3.5 million cybersecurity jobs will be open but unfulfilled by 2021. And his article was getting into how do we look for things that need to be automated, and how do we find ways to do it through AI and through machine learning to look at these security issues and build better profiles to try and alert us to things that are happening, but we may not even know they're an issue yet. It wasn't on our blog, but it was definitely Paul Duvall, our founder, continuing to write.
And so much of this is so timely too. If the entire tech industry all over the world is working from home, there's so much focus, I think, on corporate security and infrastructure security, and that extends to your application and platform security too.
Part of the discussion with Kinnaird even went down, how do we help developers be thinking about security on a regular basis? And these tools and the automation are definitely part of it. Another part, and this is kind of why you're here today, Keith, is to talk about the Stelligent Book Club and why we've created one, the culture that it's creating, and how Stelligent's utilizing the book club to really enhance our engineers. What kind of led to that foundation? How did we end up with a book club and you in charge of it?
Sure. Well, I don't like to think that I'm in charge of it. I hope everyone feels like it's theirs. But it was an idea I had late last year. I'm an avid reader. Last year, I had a New Year's resolution to read 100 books. So I was reading a lot last year, more so than usual. And I was including books that I like to read for work. So actually, again, Eric Kasich had recommended some books on testing. So I was kind of reading those on my own. It was test-driven development and specification by example, which they're both great books. I think I was about halfway through specification by example, and I was like, man, I wish I could share this with somebody. I mean, I don't know very many people that outside of work that I could talk to about specification by example. So I got on our Slack and I said, hey, I'm going to start this book club channel and we'll see where it goes. I didn't have really any plan for it. So, a whole bunch of people joined it. There was a lot of interest. And so we decided on a book to read. I believe the first one we read was Clean Architecture. So that's by Robert Martin. So we all jumped into that. So we're all engineers. So the idea is that we would read engineering, job-centric books in this book club. So we jumped into that, and there were mixed reviews on it. Some people enjoyed it. Some people thought, Clean Code, his other book, was better, which I haven't read. So yeah, we would read parts of the book. I think the first, it was of course an iterative process of reading, some of the book and then meeting on it weekly and discussing it for an hour. We found that the first time through, we were kind of reading too much each week. So we pushed that back to like a little bit less for the next book. We're all very busy. So not too much time to read, 50 pages of a in-depth, architecture book. After that, we read Accelerate. So that's a great research book by Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, and Gene Kim. Reinforcing, a lot of people really like that book. It really reinforces a lot of the DevOps principles. And really gets at the heart of what makes a great, agile DevOps culture of a company, more so than just tooling. It's about like culture and things. So there's a lot of great discussion around that. And then the next book we read was People-Centric Security. Some of the feedback, again, was mixed about that one. I think at the end, it was Xavier, who we mentioned at the blog post. It was just him and I kind of reading it there at the end. The feedback mostly was, it has great concepts, but it's more for, C-level and those type of leaders in an enterprise that, it's very high level, not a lot of, engineering meat. So the last one was A Year Without Pants, which was kind of a lighter book. We wanted to kind of pull back from engineering kind of literature, I guess. So we read The Year Without Pants by Scott Burkham. It's about his experience at WordPress when they were one of the leading companies in remote work. So Stelligent's a remote company, so we all work remotely. So there's a lot of parallels, and we could identify with.
Well, and our timing on that one was kind of unique. We started reading that one just before the pandemic hit, and so it was kind of interesting reading this book about working from home while everyone in the world is having to make this transition.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it also reminds me of another reason that I thought about starting this book club was being a fully remote company. There's not a lot of water cooler kind of talk, and I felt so. I've worked remotely for over 12 years, and I've always felt this. You really need to work at fostering these conversations whenever you work remotely, and a lot of times I would pair with engineers at Stelligent for a problem that might take maybe 10 minutes. But you end up, talking another 20 minutes, and it's not always just about that problem. We kind of need this kind of social outlet where we could just get together once a week, talk about a book, also just talk about, what we're working on and how it relates and things like that.
I know I've used it for that every once in a while. During People-Centric Security, I fell off the reading pace, I think on the third week. I still made it to a few of those discussions just to listen in on the ideas, which was really nice. Even though I hadn't been able to get the reading done, hearing people talk about it, both hit that social connectivity and being around people, kind of a need. But it also was a great way to still be learning, even though I was too busy with other stuff to be making the reading commitment. And I found that incredibly valuable. Do you know what the breakdown is of how many people are actually reading a physical book, the Kindle type device, versus listening to it on an audiobook?
I don't know. I know there was actually some interest in the audiobook people that really like to just listen to books. They actually wanted to make their own book club for just audiobooks. But I liked reading physical books, so I know I read a physical book when I can. Now, A Year Without Pants, it was free a couple months ago, so that I just grabbed as an ebook from Amazon. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly the breakdown on that. A lot of the books you read, so they're very technical. They don't have great reviews on their audio books. I don't think a lot of people are listening to audiobook versions.
Well, and you mentioned that The Year Without Pants was free for a short while. I know that's not the only book that we've seen come up in the channel as, hey, it's free right now. If you don't have it, grab a copy, which is a great way to expand your library with some of these books. Just having a bunch of people that are all looking at different technical books see, oh, hey, this book went, is free for whatever reason, go grab it. I know I've seen that in some of our other channels. We have a channel dedicated to Kubernetes and sharing what we learned. Some of the courses that are regularly quite expensive, when they hit sales, people throw it out. And hey, if you're new to the channel and you haven't watched this course, this is pretty much what we all agree is the best course on the topic. Go buy it. It's inexpensive right now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and we also used to have guilds here at Stelligent. So I know we had a container guild. I don't recall the others. The format was that somebody would choose to present something at that guild meeting, which, that can take a lot of time. So it kind of fell to the wayside. So I think the book club is another way of kind of getting the specialized knowledge sharing and conversation without so much time commitment.
Did you hit the 100 books?
I actually got to 90 books and did not get to 100.
So close.
Maybe another year. I took a year off from that. It's actually very hard to read 100 books.
That's 2 books a week, almost 2 books a week, assuming you take a small break.
Yes.
Keith, how many of those books were dry technical books,
Not many,
or not necessarily dry, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. Not many. It was a few. I wouldn't. Yeah. Test-driven development. I really loved that. So I wouldn't call that a dry book, but but no, I usually just read fiction novels. So
With everybody working from home again, I think there's almost this assumption that if you're using Slack or some other, kind of team chat system, you can pretty easily recreate your community that would otherwise be there in the office. And I think the things we're talking about really highlight the extra steps you have to go to really ensure that people do stay connected. We've got that weekly sharing is caring kind of tech show and tell for all of our engineers. We've got the book club. We have this blog writing process and the open source sharing. And all of those, more than anything, they're ways that we create connection with everybody. And we do a lot of knowledge sharing. I think especially when everybody's working from home, those are the things that specifically replace those water cooler conversations and really make your distributed remote community a community.
And I think, what you're hitting on there, it has to be an intentional aspect. And I wrote about this in the blog post on remote hiring and onboarding. You need an intentional process to replace what may have been happening by chance. You're lucky that it's happening by chance, but in a remote world, that chance doesn't exist of people randomly running into someone and making an introduction, or finding people, or even walking by a conference room and hearing people talk about it and going like, oh wait, who's having that conversation? I need to meet them. None of that accidental encounter exists. And so you need to make sure you think about these places. And the beauty of a book club, a guild, anything that I've seen is that they are not necessarily like, it's not a department thing. It's not a team thing. It's the idea is that it spreads across the company. And so you can find people from multiple teams, multiple departments, multiple even organizations that are involved. And it's a place where you can intentionally have conversation, talk about things, make connections, meet people. And, it's one of those intentional ways to make that happen. So I value these efforts.
Yeah. And, I think another aspect there too is that when you're being purposeful about it, you're protecting other people from being excluded by accident. That can happen all too often, I think, for a variety of reasons. You're opening up the invite to everybody in your company.
That's a really good point there on the intentionality of including everyone. Every time we finish reading a book, what's one thing you've tried to do to share and get more people into the book club?
We try to do a recap of it at our Sharing is Caring the following week after we finish a book. And I know in the past we've done a poll to just kind of get people's feedback. I think there's like 3 levels of don't bother reading this book, or this is interesting, or this is a must read. Kind of give that feedback so people know if they should read it or not.
It invites anyone into the channel who didn't know about it. If they've just joined the company, every 8 to 10 weeks, there's hey, this exists. This is what we just did. And come join us as we start on the next one. Again, goes to your point, Shag, of being inclusive and inviting everyone.
Yeah, and constantly renewing your community too as new people join.
Well, I hope this has encouraged everyone both to think about their internal culture and how they make security part of it, how they automate that security to make it easier for everyone involved. It's been a really good discussion this month. I'm glad I was here to be part of it. Shag, how do people get in touch with you if they want to follow up?
I would say I'm on Twitter as O'Shaughnessy. That's spelled out in our podcast notes. But yeah, that's the best way. Thanks.
All right. Keith, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, where's the best place to find you?
I have Twitter. It's at Keith Monahan. I don't tweet much, but I will definitely get DMs.
And I'm Scott Alexander. My Twitter handle is salexpdx. And we'll include all of those in the show notes so you can reach out if you have any feedback that you want to send us. That wraps up our 28th episode. Thank you for joining us as we continue our efforts to improve the software delivery process through DevOps on AWS.
Thanks for listening. For the latest from Stelligent on AWS DevOps and being a remote-first company, see stelligent.com/blog.